Good morning. Before we get started, do you remember the last three memory verses? Proverbs chapter 8, verse 11. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that they may be desired are not to be compared to it. 1 John chapter 2, 1b. And if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. In Psalms 103, verse 12, He has removed our sins as far from us as the east is from the west. As you listen to today's story, Job, a man who loved God, think about these questions. Number 1, what kind of a man was Job? Number 2, who accused Job before God? Number 3, how did God allow or permit Satan to cause trouble for Job? Number 4, what kind of disease does Satan then bring upon Job? Number 5, how did Job's 3 friends act when they visited him? And number 6, how did God comfort Job at the end of his severe trial? This week's memory verse is Philippians chapter 4, verse 12. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Job, a man who loved God. In a country called Uz lived a very rich man named Job. His cattle were numbered by thousands. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, and many servants. Not only was Job rich, but he was godly. With all his heart, he wanted to please God. He built altars of earth or of stone and made offerings to God. He prayed and asked God to forgive his sins and to bless him. When Job's sons grew to manhood and had homes of their own, they enjoyed having great banquets, and their 3 sisters were always invited. On the morning after the banquets, Job always got up early and placed offerings on the altar for each of his children. Perhaps they had sinned in their hearts during the banquet.
God loved Job. He blessed him with health and happiness. He gave him many friends and great honors. But one day Satan complained to God about Job. He said, Job served you just because you bless him. If he had lots of trouble, he would turn away from you. God knew Satan was wrong, but God told him to find out for himself, and Satan did. He sent Job lots of trouble. One day, while Job's children were feasting, a messenger came running to Job with bad news. The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, but the Sabeans came and stole all the animals and killed all the servants. I am the only one that escaped.
Before the servant was through telling Job about it, another servant brought more bad news. He said, lightning has killed all the sheep and the servants. I alone escaped to tell you. Then came another servant to Job, saying, the Chaldeans have taken the camels and killed the servants. I am the only one that got away. Before Job knew what was happening, a 4th messenger announced, your children were feasting, and the great wind blew down the house. They are all dead. Only I escaped to tell you. When Job heard all this bad news, he tore his clothes and fell down on his face. But he did not turn away from God.
Then Satan planned another trouble for Job. Satan thought, I will make life so miserable for Job that he will blame God for his suffering. Then he would want to die. In those days, many people believed troubles were always sent from God as a punishment for sins. Satan thought Job too believed this. So Satan caused great, ugly sores to break out all over Job's body. These sores were very painful. Everybody looked upon Job with horror, and even his wife wished he would die. Poor Job. 3 friends came to see Job. They had heard about his troubles and wanted to comfort him. For several days they sat with Job, but did not say a single word to him. When they saw how much he was suffering, they believed God was punishing Job for awful sins. They said, God sent this suffering because Job was trying to hide his wrongdoing from God. Poor Job. Even his friends did not believe in him.
Then God spoke to Job out of a whirlwind, and Job bowed low on the ground and worshipped. God said, I am angry with the 3 friends, for they have not spoken rightly of me. When Job heard this, he prayed for his friends. God knew Job was a servant of his. He sent Job many blessings. The sores went away. Every year, Job grew richer until he had twice as much as before the troubles came, and God again gave him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His daughters were the most beautiful women in all that country, and so health, happiness, riches, and honor came again to Job. Even to this day, Job is remembered as a man who would not let any kind of trouble or sorrow turn him away from God. Now let's answer the questions from earlier. Number 1. What kind of a man was Job? Job was a very rich man who feared God. Number 2. Who accused Job before God? Satan. Number 3. How did God allow or permit Satan to cause trouble for Job? Satan caused Job to lose all his children and possessions. Number 4. What kind of disease did Satan bring upon Job? He brought upon very painful boils that covered his body. Number 5. How did Job's 3 friends act when they visited him? They accused him of wrongdoing. And number 6. How did God comfort Job at the end of his severe trial? He blessed Job again with 7 sons and 3 daughters, as twice as much as before. Again, this week's memory verse is Philippians chapter 4, verse 12. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Think about it.
The burning hut. The only survivor of a shipwreck washed up on a small, uninhabited island. He prayed feverishly for God to rescue him, and every day he scanned the horizon for help, but none seemed forthcoming. Exhausted, he eventually managed to build a little hut out of driftwood to protect him from the elements and to store his few possessions.
But then, one day, after scavenging for food, he arrived home to find his little hut in flames, the smoke rolling up to the sky. The worst had happened. Everything was lost. He was stung with grief and anger. God, how could you do this to me? He cried. Early the next day, however, he was awakened by the sound of a ship that was approaching the island. It had come to rescue him. How did you know I was here? Asked the weary man of his rescuers. We saw your smoke signal, they replied.
Application. It is easy to get discouraged when things are going bad, but we shouldn't lose heart because God is at work in our lives, even in the midst of pain and suffering. Paul wrote, I have learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Philippians 4 and 12. Paul had confidence that good would come out of everything. Romans 8 and 28. So he learned to be thankful, not bitter, even when he was suffering. Who knows? Remember, next time your little hut is burning to the ground, it just may be a smoke signal that summons the grace of God.
This concludes today's lesson.